Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC London. It feels great to say those words, 3 years in the making, and we finally get an event back in my home country, in the UK, and I'm absolutely stoked for it. Just before we get into the breakdowns though, as always, I am going to be recapping the Bayes AI predictions from last weekend at UFC Vegas 50. That'll be a separate video on this YouTube channel at youtube.com/MMA Play 365. Again, we've got some crackers from last week. We've had crackers every single week, it seems, with the AI, and it's no different from last week. So make sure you check that out. But right into the breakdowns now for UFC London. In the heavyweight division, in the main event, we've got Alexander Volkov versus Tom Aspinall. This is a big step up in competition for Tom Aspinall, but it's one that he not only deserves, but he needs as well, because he's been dispatching of the fighters below the likes of Volkov and the other top heavyweights relatively easily. And now he gets that big step up in competition. But I actually think this is a good fight for Tom Aspinall. I think that he's not going to have to worry about getting taken down here. Volkov isn't the type of fighter that's going to come out with a relentless game plan in regards to that wrestling and trying to get him down to the mat. So Aspinall is actually going to be the one who could mix things up himself. You know, he's got a decent wrestling game. His base in MMA is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. His dad's a high-level BJJ, or was a high-level BJJ player. Now he's a BJJ coach. Obviously Aspinall's BJJ coach. So Aspinall's got Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So when we're looking at that striking game, it's going to be a real battle in my opinion. Volkov's tall, he's long, he's rangy, and he fires straight punches, straight kicks, straight attacks down the middle. But Aspinall, in my opinion, is more dynamic. He's a better mover. He's a really light heavyweight. I don't mean light heavyweight as in 205, but he's a lighter heavyweight compared to the likes of guys like Volkov that are weighing in close to 265 pounds. And what that allows Aspinall to be is quick on the feet, movement, slick, in and out of range, landing combinations. It seems that he's got a good cardio. This is one of the slight red flags in regards to Aspinall for this fight, because this is the first time potentially he could be going 5 rounds, but I've seen nothing in tape to suggest that after round 1 and round 2 he's getting tired or anything like that. So I think the cardio will hold up, and I think this fight's going to be won and lost on the feet. I've got concerns with Volkov from his last fight against Tybura. I bet Volkov there, and Volkov just did not look like the same fighter. I thought he was injured whilst I was watching it, potentially something wrong with him, injury during camp, but he never mentioned anything. And I guarantee you, if that was Tom Aspinall in the cage with that Alexander Volkov last time out, Tom Aspinall would have absolutely ran through him. So it could have been a one-off bad performance from Volkov, but I think Tom Aspinall's the star rising. I think he's going to be faster. I think he's going to land more volume. I think he carries some power as well. I'm not convinced he's going to be able to take Volkov out, at least not easily, but I just think he's going to be able to land good numbers on Volkov, be able to push a pace. Aspinall's the more likely fighter to mix things up. He could have a plan B with that wrestling and grappling. Again, I don't think the fight's going to be won and lost there, but it just adds a little bit of a different element for Aspinall. I think Aspinall's definitely a fighter to watch. I've said it for a while. Like I've already mentioned, he's dynamic, quick, fast on the feet, good volume, rips to the body, rips to the head. I think he's actually going to be able, especially with that UK crowd behind him, I think he's going to be able to really push through this fight and really look impressive in this step up in competition. So I'm picking Tom Aspinall to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we've got Arnold Allen versus Dan Hooker. And this one's interesting because Dan Hooker's actually coming down to featherweight for the first time in years. He used to fight at featherweight, but as his body was getting bigger, you know, the weight cuts he was struggling a little bit, and he just needed to make that move up into the lightweight division. And he's done phenomenal in the lightweight division. He's fought all the best guys, and unfortunately he has just fell short when he gets those big step ups. And I'm not convinced this is the right move for him to come down. I think his title aspirations at lightweight are the same as his title aspirations at featherweight. I just don't think it's going to happen. And I just feel that he's going to be putting his body in through more stress with a weight cut later in life when he was struggling when he was younger. And I am putting a big emphasis on this weight cut because I genuinely feel that it could be a problem. He's not going to be as fast in the featherweight division. His cardio could potentially take a hit. The durability concerns are absolutely there. He's been in some wars at lightweight, so coming down to featherweight. And then you've got Arnold Allen on the other side. He's quick. Again, just like I've mentioned with Tom Aspinall, he's a quick striker, moves well in and out of range, slides in and out of range nicely, can evade danger, but his striking and his combinations are just so fast when he puts it all together, and he's a difficult fighter to beat. And he hits hard as well. I mean, he's not a knockout artist, But listen, he rocked Sadiq Youssef multiple times, and we've just seen what Sadiq Youssef is capable of last weekend at UFC Vegas 50. So Arnold Allen's decent. He's fast. He's got a bit of power behind it. I've got a lot of red flags on Dan Hooker with that move back down to featherweight. I don't think it's the right move. I could be wrong, and if he proves me wrong, then that's fair enough. But I've just got concerns there for sure. And with Dan Hooker, I don't think he can come in here and do a performance what he put out against Nasrat Haqparast, where he can just take him down and hold him down. Allen's defensive wrestling's okay, his grappling's okay as well. I don't think he's just going to be able to be held down. I do think this is another fight that's going to be won and lost on the feet. Obviously, Hooker's a good striker, you can't take that away from him. But like I said, I think his body's going to be a bit depleted. There's concerns with the cardio and the durability. And Arnold Allen, again, like I said with Tom Aspinall, is a fighter that's on the rise, that's looking better every time we see him. I'm picking Arnold Allen to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Shamil Abdurakhimov versus Sergei Pavlovich. In the heavyweight division, another banger. I don't see this one going very long. I think it's a fight definitely that's going to be won and lost on the feet. Abdurakhimov does have wrestling, he's Russian, and we have seen that wrestling chops from him before, but he's not a relentless wrestler. He's got it in his back pocket should he need it. But I think that in this fight, it's going to be one that's won and lost on the feet. I think Pavlovich is going to be able to land something hard on Abdurakhimov. Abdurakhimov took a couple of beatings in his last few fights, especially the Dorcas fight as well. Dorcas almost knocked him out twice in that fight. Didn't look good for him. That chin, definitely there's a question mark on that, especially with this being a heavyweight fight as well. But Pavlovich has got that touch of death. Once he lands, he can drop his opponents. He can knock them out. He's got raw power in his hands, and he's very steady to get into his fights. He makes his reads, and then he starts to attack and put some power behind his strikes. And Abdurakhimov isn't really a fighter that's going to push a massive pace anyway, so I don't think he's going to really put Pavlovich under too much pressure whilst Pavlovich is making these reads. And once those reads are in, I think Pavlovich is going to get into exchanges. Pavlovich's chin's okay. Yes, he was hurt against Overeem, but in the grand scheme of things, his chin's all right. Abdurakhimov doesn't possess massive knockout power from a heavyweight perspective, so I think Pavlovich is going to come into this fight. I think it's going to start relatively slow. Both fighters might be making reads, but once Pavlovich has made his reads, I think he's going to come into range, exchange inside that boxing range, and just land something that's going to knock Abdurakhimov out. So my pick is Sergei Pavlovich to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Paddy Pimblett versus Rodrigo Vargas. This is a really good fight for Paddy Pimblett, in my opinion. The fighter, the star on the rise. I can't wait to hear the crowd as he's walking out. He talks the talk, he walks the walk, and there's a reason why everybody is talking about Paddy Pimblett, and he is definitely a focal part of this event at UFC London. I do have some slight concerns with Paddy Pimblett though, but I feel that these concerns are going to be more apparent when he steps up in the level of competition, when he's making his way through the division. I do think that he can be hittable. I think he brawls a little bit too much. I think the wrestling, the grappling side, once he faces a good wrestler and a grappler, that he might start to come a little bit unstuck. But in this position, in this fight against Rodrigo Vargas, I think Paddy Pimblett's going to be absolutely fine. Sure, Vargas could potentially land something that knocks Pimblett out. Vargas is aggressive. He does like to come forward. He does like to land hard shots. So if Rodrigo Vargas just happened to land something hard on Pimblett and knock him out, I don't think I would be too surprised. But in the grand scheme of things, I think Paddy Pimblett's the better technical striker. I think his aggression's going to be a little bit better. He's going to be buoyed on by the crowd as well. That's definitely going to be a plus side here for the home fighter. I do think that the wrestling of Paddy Pimblett's slightly better here. I think his grappling top side is going to be slightly better here as well. So in this particular fight, I think Paddy Pimblett ticks all the boxes. I think he edges Rodrigo Vargas pretty much in every single area, apart from maybe raw power. But again, if Vargas doesn't land that one shot that's going to knock him out, I just genuinely think he's going to struggle wherever this fight goes. It wouldn't shock me for Pimblett to find a late finish if Rodrigo Vargas is tired out and he's landed an accumulation of strikes. Pimblett doesn't have that raw one-punch knockout power, but definitely with the accumulation of strikes, he could potentially get Vargas out there late in the fight. Or if Pimblett was to find his way on the mat and find a back and, sink in a rear naked choke, that wouldn't surprise me here. I think Pimblett's got multiple paths to victory, multiple avenues of victory. I'm picking Paddy Pimblett to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Nikita Krylov versus Paul Craig. This is a really, really good fight, and I think it's a sleeper fight for potentially fight of the night, in my opinion. Both fighters, though, the problem that I've got is they're both relatively untrustworthy. Nikita Krylov more than Paul Craig, actually, in that respect. Like, I've seen multiple fights of him where he's looking great, and then he'll just make a mistake or do something daft or something unnecessary, more like an unforced error, and, it costs him. He's on his back then, or he's struggling against the cage, or he gets himself finished. And Krylov is that type of fighter, kill or be killed fighter. He's been to the decision in his career, but it's not very often. And like I say, it's kill or be killed, whether it be on the feet. He's got a decent karate game. He's got decent striking on the mat. He's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, so he's got good submissions. His wrestling could do with some working on. But Paul Craig, pretty much the same fighter. He's a good BJJ player himself. Absolutely phenomenal submissions, and his striking's improving, his wrestling's improving. So I think it's actually quite an even fight, again with two fighters, in my opinion, that are relatively untrustworthy. And I don't mean any disrespect there, but I've seen multiple fights where, again, unforced errors have come into play and put them in bad positions. But I'm actually going to side with the underdog in this fight, in Paul Craig. I definitely think that Krylov could potentially have the edge in the striking. But if Paul Craig comes in here with a wrestling game plan, I just think this fight is going to be won and lost with what happens on the mat. And I ultimately think whoever's on top is going to be having the success. And I know that's a cliche, but what I mean by that is I think whichever fighter's on top is going to be able to be good enough on top to prevent their opponent from sweeping, reversing position, or submitting from bottom. And I think that person on top is more likely to be Paul Craig, who is working on his wrestling, who is more likely to have that wrestling game plan in this fight. So I'm siding with the underdog, and I'm picking Paul Craig to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Gunnar Nelson returning after a layoff versus Takashi Sato, who's actually stepping in on short notice. So a very interesting fight from that perspective. Like I said, Gunnar Nelson's been out for quite a while. Sato didn't think he was fighting on this card until a couple of weeks ago. So from that perspective, interesting, but I do think that Gunnar Nelson's rightly favoured in this fight. I think he's a minus 350 favourite. I understand it. You look at Takashi Sato's fight against Miguel Baeza. Baeza was able to take him down, work him completely on the mat, do some really good work, and he ended up submitting Takashi Sato. So for Gunnar Nelson to come in here, he could absolutely replicate that game plan. I think Nelson's a better wrestler than Baeza, likely a better grappler as well, and I think Gunnar Nelson will be able to find the back at some point of Takashi Sato and submit him. I do think the fight's going to be won and lost with what happens on the mat, because even if Gunnar Nelson doesn't come out with a wrestling game plan or have that as a focal point of his game plan, if Takashi Sato starts landing on him and starts trying to pull away with the fight, then Gunnar Nelson's going to be forced to shoot a takedown. I think he will be able to get the takedowns. So either way, whether Gunnar Nelson starts well and is able to implement his game plan, or whether he doesn't start well, Sato implements his game plan, that'll just force Gunnar Nelson to look for the takedown even harder. I'm picking Gunnar Nelson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Molly McCann versus Luana Carolina. Luana Carolina, tall, rangy striker. Molly McCann, a ball of energy, aggressive inside of boxing range, loves to get in there. She's absolutely mental, real fan favourite, good fighter to watch. Really enjoy watching Molly McCann's fights, but then she's got a little bit of wrestling herself. She's got some grappling, depending on her opponent. If her opponent isn't naturally a wrestler themselves or a grappler themselves, then she's going to be able to have those advantages against her opponent. And I actually think that's the case in this fight. I think the line's probably going to move as we get further into fight week a little bit more. Molly McCann opened up an underdog. She's now a favourite, and I kind of get that line movement as well. But I do think that Molly McCann's going to have too much for Luana Carolina in this fight. Luana Carolina, I think she's going to have the most success if she can get range and stay on the outside, kick from the outside, punch from the outside, and when she comes in, come all the way into clinch. But Molly McCann's just not going to let her have her own way in that respect. And again, like I keep saying with these English fighters, they're going to be absolutely buoyed on by this crowd, by the UK crowd. Molly McCann's going to want to get in the face of Carolina. She's going to be aggressive, pushing forwards. I think McCann might have to eat a couple of shots at times to get into that boxing range. But once she's into that boxing range, she's going to be looking the more aggressive fighter. She's going to be landing the harder shots. She's going to be landing more volume as well. And if she does want to mix in that wrestling and grappling, then I think she could potentially do that as well. Again, I think Molly McCann's just got the edge slightly in every single area in this fight, but that aggression and forward pressure, especially if this fight goes to a decision, is exactly what the judges love to see. So I'm picking Molly McCann to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Mokaev versus Cody Durden. Now, regardless of what you think of Cody Durden, after the comments that he made after his last fight, and obviously a load of stuff's been dragged up through Twitter and other social media. I'm not going to get into that. I'm here to talk about the fight. But Cody Durden's a good fighter, and I actually think this is a good test for Mokaev. And I actually love this fight because Mohamed Mokaev could have been put against a guy where he clearly edges in every single area: boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, grappling. But the UFC have matched this fight really well, and I'm really glad that Cody Durden is that first opponent for Mokaev, because we're going to find out so much about Mokaev. Mokaev, for those that don't know, he's been on my radar for so many years, and anybody that follows the UK MMA regional scene will know exactly who he is and have followed him for years as well. This dude was a 22-0 amateur, plenty of fights, unbeaten in the amateur scene, comes over, he has 5 fights in Brave, wins 4 of them, the other a no contest due to an accidental groin strike, but he was dominating that fight before that anyway. Brave's a legit promotion, now he's into the UFC. His base is wrestling, his striking's improving, but his topside grappling's good as well, especially for his weight. He does lay heavy on top. And Cody Durden on the other side, good boxer, good striking. He's got a wrestling background. His jiu-jitsu's really good as well, sneaky good jiu-jitsu. So this is why it's a great test for Mokaev, because he is going to be tested in every single area. His striking's going to be tested, his grappling's going to be tested, his wrestling's going to be tested, his cardio's going to be tested. But this is where I think Mokaev is actually going to come out on top, because Cody Durden in his last fight, we saw some cardio issues when he's over wrestling, over grappling. And if he does go in there looking to wrestle and grapple with Mokaev, he's going to be made to work. And that seemingly is where Cody Durden starts to tire. I don't think Mokaev tires in a fight like that. I think this is going to be a fight where the wrestling and the grappling is going to play a significant part of who wins and who loses. And I think that Mokaev is going to slightly get the edge over Durden. Maybe not in the early stages of the fight. I do think Durden's live early, but the longer this fight goes on, the more I think Mokaev really starts to pull ahead. And I think this is going to be another good showing from him. But ultimately, and more importantly, from a gambler's perspective, we're going to learn and find out a lot about where Mohamed Mokaev is in regards to his skill set in this fight. I'm picking Mohamed Mokaev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Mike Grundy versus Makwan Amirkhani. I think this is a good fight again for Mike Grundy. Makwan Amirkhani I've liked this dude for a long time. He's cashed some underdog tickets for me as well. And he's got a decent game, he's got decent boxing, he's got decent wrestling. He's got good grappling. He's a front choke specialist, saying that he can lock up front chokes from like 9 different setups or something like that. So definitely something that Grundy's got to be careful for, because Grundy's a wrestler himself. Commonwealth bronze medalist, I believe. So Grundy's going to be looking for takedowns. He's got to be careful that he doesn't leave his neck out there. But listen, Grundy's a front choke specialist himself as well. So he's definitely going to be well versed in that aspect of the game from a defensive and an offensive perspective. So it's going to come down to who's going to be able to implement their game plan and who's going to be able to slightly pull away with the fight. Now, when it comes to the striking, I think Grundy's striking's underrated. I'd give him maybe a very, very slight edge to Amirkhani, but I think the striking's really close. However, when it comes to the wrestling and the grappling, again, it's quite close. I don't think Grundy's going to run away with this fight, but I do believe that the longer this fight goes on, the more success Grundy's going to have with that wrestling. I think Grundy's pushed through, real tough times against the likes of, for example, Movsar Evloev. So I think somebody like Makwan Amirkhani, who is going to be a good test for Grundy, I think it's a test that Grundy can overcome. Like I said, I think Grundy's the better wrestler. Because he's the better wrestler, he's going to be the more likely fighter to have the more topside positions in this fight, and that will play a factor if this fight goes to the scorecards. I think a submission on either side, unless there's a really big mistake, is unlikely, but that big mistake could be giving a neck in that front choke and getting submitted. I think on the feet, I don't think there's going to be a knockout, so I do think there's a good chance of this fight going the distance, and I just think Grundy's going to have had more of those wrestling exchanges in regards to success. I think he's going to have more topside control, and if that is where this fight is going to be won and lost, in that wrestling and grappling department, with the striking being very, very close, potentially very even, then Grundy is the more likely fighter to win on the scorecard. So I'm picking Mike Grundy to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Elise Reed versus Cory McKenna, and I think this is a solid fight for Cory McKenna. Elise Reed's okay, her striking's decent, her grappling's decent, her wrestling's okay. She's a very well-rounded fighter, but there's definitely a ceiling to her game. I definitely don't think she's a fighter that's going to be entering the rankings and really making a surge throughout the division. But I could see, and I can say the same for Cory McKenna. I do think Cory McKenna could potentially make her way through the division. I do think she's a fighter that is getting better and better each time out. Every time we see her, her striking's improving, but her wrestling's good, her topside grappling's good, team alpha male as well. So Cory McKenna, I think, is in a really good position in this fight, because even though her striking's improving, I think she's the better striker technically. I think she's more aggressive, holds more power. I think her wrestling's going to be better. I think her grappling's going to be better. She's the more likely fighter to spend more time on top, in top position. So for me, Cory McKenna again edges every single area in this fight, ticks all the boxes for me. I think Elise Reed is in for a long night. I don't think it's going to be overly competitive for the most part. Obviously, Elise Reed will have some moments in this fight for sure. It's an MMA fight, but I think Cory McKenna is in for a good night here. I think she's got a good fight ahead of her stylistically and from a skill set perspective. I'm picking Cory McKenna to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jack Shaw versus Timur Valiev. And the betting line's closing with this fight, and I suspected it would. I think it opened a little bit too wide, not massively, but I did expect the lines to be a little bit closer. But obviously that UK money's coming in. The more we get into fight week, I think the more this line closes up. But I think it's a phenomenal fight for Timur Valiev. Jack Shaw, he's a fighter. I cashed him last time out in a parlay, which was nice. He's got decent boxing. He's got good wrestling. He's got good jiu-jitsu. He'll hang on you. He's okay in the clinch as well. And I actually think with some significant developments that Jack Shaw could make a run in this division, potentially into the rankings. But Timur Valiev's an absolute different beast. Timur Valiev is so unorthodox, so elusive, so dynamic on the feet. He'll never throw the same combination more than once in a row. He'll come out throwing combinations with his hands, mix it with kicks, start with kicks, end with kicks. He's just a super dynamic fighter, a really solid fighter as well. Trains with some good guys in Frankie Edgar and Marlon Moraes. Obviously, Moraes had a bad showing last weekend, but aside from that, he trains with some good guys. He's got good wrestling. He's got good topside grappling, good calm, controlled topside grappling. And I think Jack Shaw's just gonna have a lot of problems in this fight because I don't think Jack Shaw's gonna be able to outstrike him. I think Timur Valiev's quicker. I think his movement's better. I think he's more dynamic. I think he has more power. I think he'll throw more volume. Then with the wrestling, maybe that's where Jack Shaw can try and push it. But Timur Valiev's a good wrestler. If he gets taken down, he can get back up to his feet. He'll have been in that gym with much better wrestlers day in, day out than what Jack Shaw is. And I don't mean any disrespect to Jack Shaw. He is a good wrestler himself, but Timur Valiev's just on a different level. And if Jack Shaw can't get that wrestling going, then he's not going to be able to get that BJJ going. Now, the BJJ is probably where Jack Shaw does have the advantages in this fight. But if he can't get this fight to the mat at least regularly or hold Timur Valiev down, then he's going to have a lot of trouble in just being able to get that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu going. That game just won't be there for him unless he can have significant time on top, which I don't think he can. And for that reason, I think Timur Valiev is just, like I said, the better striker. His defensive wrestling will hold up, and Timur Valiev will be able to make this fight play out where he wants it to and where he's best. I'm picking Timur Valiev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jai Herbert versus Ilia Topuria. This is a really good fight, and I think it's going to be fun for as long as it lasts. But I do think that Topuria holds some significant stylistic advantages in this fight. Jai Herbert's good everywhere. He's a good long-range striker. Fires sniper shots down the middle. He doesn't waste too much energy. He'll keep his movement going. He's got good movement. He's always on his toes. He's got a decent jiu-jitsu game himself. His wrestling's probably the area where he's got the most holes. But I think with Topuria, he's just a different animal at the minute. I think his striking is on point. And although I feel if Jai Herbert wins this fight, he'll win it by keeping the fight on the feet, using his range, popping away with the jab, the 1-2 straight down the middle, taking the fight to a decision and winning on the scorecards. But Topuria is aggressive. He's got power. He knows he's got power in both hands. He'll come forwards. He'll look to exchange with Jai Herbert inside of boxing range and look to land some hard shots on him. But then the real issue for Jai Herbert, we saw this last time out against Renato Moicano, is Herbert can get taken down. And when he gets taken down, he's going to struggle against a good topside grappler. Renato Moicano was able to have a ton of success against him. And I think Topuria will have that same success against him as well. If Topuria gets on top of Herbert, I think Herbert's going to be stuck on his back. He might try and look for a couple of submissions, but ultimately I don't think he's going to be overly successful. And if he does get back up to his feet, I think Topuria will strike to get into that wrestling entry, to that takedown entry, and just get the fight back down to the mat and just rinse and repeat. I think it's a real tough fight for Jai Herbert. I can't see past the Topuria win because, like I said, for Herbert to win, I think he's got to take this fight on the scorecards and out-volume Topuria, but that means that you'd have stopped Topuria landing anything significant himself or much significant shots. And that also means you've stopped Topuria's wrestling and grappling, which I don't think that Herbert can do. So I'm picking Ilia Topuria to win this fight. And finally, we've got Nathaniel Wood versus Vince Morales. Vince Morales taking this fight on short notice. And I think this is a really difficult fight for Vince Morales. Vince Morales is, his striking's okay. He looked good last time out against Louis Smolka, landed that big knockout early on in the first round, made a statement in that fight, and now he's getting rewarded with a fight against Nathaniel Wood. But the thing is, outside of that top 15, which we haven't really seen Nathaniel Wood delve into too much yet, but outside of that top 15, I think Wood's just going to be a difficult fight for pretty much every fighter. The pace, the pressure that he puts on, getting in your face. Sure, he's been wobbled. Sure, he's been knocked out and finished. But the dude's 17-5, so his style clearly works for him more often than it doesn't. But I think that Wood, like I said, his speed, his movement, his ability to be able to take a shot and land a combination back and just be in a war, should a fight enter a war, he's trustworthy from that perspective. But then he's also got sneaky good wrestling, and then when his fights are on the mat, he's got sneaky good grappling as well. He's just a nightmare to deal with because, like I said, ultimately that pace and that pressure that he puts on his opponents can be overwhelming. Casey Kenny handled it really well, but I think, again, if that's the Nathaniel Wood we see against Casey Kenny in this fight against Vince Morales, then I really struggle to see Morales having much success at all. I think definitely Wood's got to be careful of coming in too recklessly inside of boxing range because, like we have seen, Vince Morales can crack. But outside of that, I think Wood's going to land a ton of volume. The most volume that Vince Morales has landed is around 70 strikes in his UFC fights. Nathaniel Wood has almost doubled that in his last two. So I think the speed, the movement, the pace, the pressure, the volume, the ability to be able to mix things up and potentially take a fight in a different direction to keep the opponent on the toes. I think Nathaniel Wood checks all the boxes. I'm picking Nathaniel Wood to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. This is UFC London. As I've said, really love to say those words. We haven't said it for 3 years, so I'm really looking forward to this card. I hope you've enjoyed the podcast and the breakdowns. As always, I appreciate the support, the likes, the subscriptions to the YouTube channel. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you again next week.